Hello, good morning. My name is Alia Azariah. I'm Director of Aftercare for Safe House Project. I'm also a person with lived experience. Today, we're going to be discussing a webinar entitled Beyond Immediate Care, which is on supporting survivors in long-term care. Meaning, after crisis, after significant time and investment in healing and integration into the workforce and the housing force, and how we support survivors in that independence stage and leadership stage as well, which is something I know internally we have a lot of conversations about, something I've had conversations with everyone on this panel about, and many of you that are attending as well. Like I said before, I'm a person with lived experience and entered into this field actually fairly quickly after my exploitation. I think less than 3 years after exploitation, which was really fast, maybe even too fast in some ways. And my experience has been that it's really been hard as a person who wasn't in crisis or who had been able to experience some stability to find support services, which I still, even now, 7 years out, still need oftentimes, or just need places where I feel like I can be authentic, not be okay. I know Monique and I have discussed how important those spaces are as well. And then just need support and need understanding of like, what are my next step? What are my options? What else is out there for me? Whether it is for more healing or it is for things that I want to pursue. What does that look like? How do I just get coaching and encouragement about those next steps and community in this space when I'm not, my life isn't falling down anymore. It's not falling in pieces. I have a safe place. I have a family. And all of these things I'm just trying to learn how to excel in, right? Which is a totally new phase of life for many of us that have lived experience. Like, what is it like to excel, and how do we do this? And when these things that are still unhealed or that are still raw come up, like where do we have these safe spaces to walk through that? So I'm excited to be able to bring this conversation to everyone here and hear from our panelists, who I'm going to go ahead and introduce. We're going to start with Kate Okamoto. She spent the last 15 years focused on the advancement, health, and healing of people affected by gender-based violence and systemic oppression. She began at Empowered Network as the first New York advocate, and then worked as the West Coast program manager before assuming her current role as program director there at Empowered Network. Jennifer Taylor with She Has a Name has been involved in the Central Ohio human trafficking awareness community since 2018. Joining She Has a Name in 2023 as the Director of People and Programs, she manages their survivor support groups and the scholarship process. And we also have Monique Calderon, who is a fierce advocate for survivors of commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. She's an experienced trainer on these subjects and a survivor overcomer of sexual exploitation. She's been involved in this field for over 10 years and is currently the care manager at Treasures, where she provides direct services for survivors and creates strategic partnerships with resources around the country. And she also worked as a survivor advocate at Zoe International with youth who'd experienced CSEC in LA County. So I'm going to pass this to our panelists just to give a short synopsis of the services that they provide with their organizations. So Kate, we're going to start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name, as Alia mentioned, is Kate Okamoto. And at Empowered Network, we really seek to be kind of the aftercare for the aftercare and work with people beyond the crisis. So much crisis exists and is incredibly important, but as just mentioned, there needs to be really a space for people to rebuild after they're no longer in crisis. And so we focus on year-long plans. We call them empowerment plans that are focused around goals that survivors have for housing, education, or employment. And an advocate will walk alongside them as they build out that plan towards what a year from now would look like really increased fiscal independence for their individual life, for their individual circumstances around those three areas. And so They will work with that advocate to develop the plan and then have that advocate by their side throughout the year as an accountability partner, as a sounding board, as a person to check in with, as a person to just work with them through that period of time as they, go about reaching their own goals and dreams.
Thank you, Kate.
Sure.
Jennifer.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you today. I'm Jennifer Taylor. I'm the Director of People Programs with She Has a Name. She Has a Name exists to fight human trafficking through education and support of all of those impacted. So within Central Ohio, we are the trainers. We train most of the organizations. We have public education, community education. We can do corporate education, whatever it may be, and we can do things on a variety of different topics. And on the survivor support side, we offer support groups. We work through a recovery center here in Central Ohio for those that are just coming out of the life. And then we also have a Thrivers group, which I think is going to be the focus of today. Our Thrivers group are those women who have been out of the life for a while. They are living life independently. They're working, they're in society, but they just need that touch with their sisters every once in a while. So we have a group that meets once a month. And we also do scholarships. We do academic scholarships, which are challenging in today's funding right now. And we also do a dream scholarship, which is a really special thing here in Central Ohio.
Thank you. Monique.
Thanks so much, Alia. So my name is Monique Calderon, and I'm the care manager over at Treasures. So at Treasures, what we are is we're an outreach and support group for women in the commercial sex industry, those who've been sex trafficked, and those who otherwise identify with the commercial sex industry. And really our mission is to equip and empower women in the sex industry and survivors of trafficking to live healthy and flourishing lives. And so some of the ways that we do that is we offer survivor-led virtual support groups. So we do offer services across the country and really globally. We have women who are joining in from all over the world into our virtual support groups. And we also offer a mentorship program. And so our mentorship program is really a place where our mentees are our mentors, they are survivor informed, they're trauma informed, and they really walk alongside of our mentees throughout for a year process. And this is a place where the mentees have that added layer of support. And it's also a place where they can work on goals. And so it really is a wonderful opportunity for the women to dive a little deeper in their recovery and healing journey.
Thanks, Monique. So I'm going to move into some questions for you all. Hopefully we will have time for question and answer from our attendees at the end. Attendees, there is a question and answer section on the bottom of your screen there that's a little like speaker block with a question mark in it. As we're going through the webinar, if you have questions come up, please don't feel that you need to wait to use that space. Enter your questions in there, but please do it there and not the chat, because I don't have another moderator on here, and if we enter into the chat, a lot of the times I lose those questions. So if you put them in the question and answer area, I will still have them when we get to the end. But my first question for our panelists would be, what do you all see as the biggest gaps currently in supporting survivors who've exited crisis and are transitioning into that long-term stability? And Kate, I'll start with you for this question.
Sure. I mean, I think there's this misconception, right, that once somebody exits crisis, that that's it, like everything's all worked out, your life makes sense, I mean, whose life is like that? Like who in any realm of the world has a life like that. So I think because the focus has been so much on crisis and crisis services, hasn't been a ton of thought towards kind of what does it look like for life to be normal and what are all of the skills you need to be able to manage that. And it really requires a lot of management, especially in a world like the one we live in now that is high tech, that is moving fast, right? And so I think there also in the survivor community are gaps in knowledge that people have missed, right? Like things that I think like are kind of assumed socially that people should know. Why would you know that? Like you don't know what you don't know. And so I think what I have seen is kind of those kinds of gaps in career areas, in understanding kind of how to navigate those kinds of spaces, and from everything from building a resume and sending professional emails and, when to show up and what kinds of questions to ask, to navigating, housing spaces. And again, it's all about kind of like what's the education in your lived experience in the world that you need to be able to navigate all of those different areas of your life. So I think that, and then really a long-term financial healing and education is one of those things that is really missing. Nobody likes to talk about money very much, especially women in money. And so I think so often there are really essential tools that people are missing to be able to make the best use of the resources that they gain from hard work and working, all of that building that they're doing. And so understanding, how to manage debt, credit repair, all of those things are really big gaps that I see.
Yeah. Jennifer, Monique, do either of you want to add to those gaps?
I couldn't agree with you more, Kate. I think the other gap that needs to be addressed is childcare. It's huge, and it is a huge barrier. We're blessed in Central Ohio. We have a couple of organizations that deal with workforce development, and as Kate was saying, having that understanding of what it's like to have a full-time job. You have to show up on time. You have to be present. But again, that financial piece that Kate brought up is I think greatly lacking. And with that is the childcare piece. It's hard. And you add in housing, you add in, some of the other things. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'd love to touch on really what does it look like when there's a loss of support, right? It's like all hands on deck when we have a survivor come through who's actively in crisis. But then what does that look like once that support is removed from the survivor? And what happens often, and I can share even from my own experience and the experiences of working with my clients, is that there's then this feeling of abandonment and rejection, which is really touching on those deep wounds from, early on in their history. And so what happens is the next chapter then becomes very lonely. And really, it's an isolation where there's a lack of counsel and there's a lack of people that we can just go to on those days when we're struggling, right? And just because we're stable doesn't mean that the narratives from the past aren't going to surface. And so having a safe, non-judgmental space to share, hey, my bank account, for instance, right? This is for many of us, it's at a certain level. And I thought about posting an ad. I thought about hitting up a regular. I thought about hitting up my XP, because what am I supposed to do? But trust me, when they're able to say it out loud, what happens is it really dispels that. And they're able, if they had support, to then process through and have an understanding of, oh, that's just I'm still creating a new neural pathway. that when my bank account gets low, like it's okay. I've got that check coming in. So what happens when there is this lack of support is that we are left with thoughts and feelings that are really still from that old programming from the commercial sex industry. And so what happens then is that's really the breeding grounds for relapse. And so this is why support is just so important past that crisis point in our clients' lives.
And even just validating that it's okay to not have like reached a perfect healing point, right? Because I think like definitely my own experience was I felt like, okay, now that I've, experienced, like been to this program and especially like now that I've started speaking and sharing, and for those of us that do that in faith-based spaces, I feel like oftentimes it's even more amplified that we're supposed to be like perfect and okay and fully fine now, and trying to like show back into these places to say like, hey, I'm actually really struggling, or I had this thought, or I thought I was over this, or these, feelings. Yeah, these like things that we learn through other people telling us are just like, that's just your brain trying to protect you. Say thank you for it trying to protect you and move on to something else. But without knowing that, it is just this feeling of shame and complete isolation because we're not having these conversations with other people who have walked along survivors in this stage, or other survivors who've already been through that, who can let you know like, oh, not every relationship I got into after I left my trafficking situation was healthy, or, not every financial decision was smart, or that was really hard for me to handle this, or I still struggled with my kids and parenting. Unless we're having these kinds of conversations openly, my experience at least was that I had no idea. I thought you exit trafficking, like you take these services and then you're healed. And the fact that I'm not makes me somehow like I need to keep that really quiet, especially if I want to, as I chose to, work in this field, which not every survivor needs to choose, right? But especially if I wanted to be in this field, that I needed to keep it really quiet when I was struggling. Sorry, went off on a little bit there. We're gonna try and get back on the questions that I had laid out for y'all. What would you all say is, and Jennifer, if you want to touch on this, because you kind of did in your intro there, what are some of the biggest funding and policy barriers to supporting long-term survivor sex or survivor success?
It's, yeah, I think we're all of us who work for nonprofits are walking on eggshells right now because we don't know what funding we will have through grants, whether that be state or federal. We don't know. So we are struggling to really focus on donors and donor management, and looking to corporations. It's really difficult in today's environment, to the point where we're looking at suspending some potential programs, some of the scholarship programs, because we just don't have the funding that we used to have. Granted, we have got an incredibly aggressive fundraising campaign for 2025, but I feel like we can no longer count on, so many times some of those grants would just be, oh yeah, okay, we know that's coming. Well, we don't know that anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we are really struggling with.
Absolutely. Does anyone want to add to that?
I was just thinking about the narrative that you were talking about, Alia and Monique, and how much that kind of plays into the funding piece, right? Like what all of us are supposed to present is like our program, any program, right, will do this amazing thing. At the end of the program, this person will be in this amazing place. And while that's not untrue necessarily, amazing doesn't look perfect. And I think so often it's really easy to lose sight of that, and also to have heard this narrative, after you do this, you will be this. And if you don't feel like that 100% of the time, all of the time, you're like, maybe it's me, maybe something's wrong with me, maybe I didn't do it well enough, maybe I missed something, maybe this is just my problem again, right? And I think undoing those voices and being in community is so incredibly important to push back against those narratives. And I think the other thing that we often see with funding is the desire of funders to not be funding the same thing over and over and over again, that oftentimes organizations feel pressure to create a new program, to have another thing that we're doing that's going to change the game in this other new way, which, while that's also possible, right, and we want to leave the door open for that, there is also the possibility that the things that we're doing really work and they're really important and they just need to be funded regularly because, you know, it's crucial and it doesn't need to change every time to be fundable.
Oh my goodness, Kate, I couldn't agree with you more, right? At Treasures, we have been going for 21 years, and we've been going for 21 years offering the same thing, support groups and our mentorship program, and it works and it's needed. And yet, absolutely, we're hearing from those who want to fund our organizations, hey, how about this thing over here? But when we know this has worked, we have proven data over 20 years that this works, we would really appreciate to continue. We know that this is our lane. If we have that awareness, let's stay in our lane and let's keep going, because really what it takes in providing relevant services to survivors is it takes a village, right? And so not every organization needs to be addressing and doing everything under the umbrella of what is needed, right, to support survivors. That's where we all here, we link arms and we provide those linkages to referrals. We provide those warm handoffs, right? And the more that we know each other and we're not so siloed, and the more we partner with each other, this is only going to benefit those that we serve. And so, as we're thinking about this, it really has me thinking about like the policy gaps, for instance, in implementing survivor supportive laws. Like right now, I'm thinking about the DBRA, so the Debt Bondage Repair Act. So for those of you who might not know what the DBRA is it's really an opportunity for those who were being trafficked and their credit got destroyed from their trafficker, causing them to open up credit cards and take out loans and doing certain things that have affected and obliterated their credit. And we all know bad credit is going to be a barrier. They're not going to be able to get into housing. They're not going to be able to get transportation. It's now affecting how they're getting hired, right? And so what the DBRA does is that works with the credit bureaus. So now the credit bureaus are not dinging the survivor's credit for that debt that got accumulated during the time of their trafficking. But what I'm finding right now, this is a real live issue. So anyone who's hearing me here, if y'all can help, please message me. What I'm finding is now the credit bureaus are making it even more difficult to be able to access something that legally should be available to survivors. So before, it just took an affidavit from a certified caseworker stating, hey, they were a survivor, here was the time frame, and then they would be able to go through the process. Well, now they're making it where you need to have an additional authorization from either a state or federal agency in addition to that affidavit for us to consider for the DBRA. And so there's policies and there's laws that go into effect. And yet us here, boots on the ground, we're not even being educated. Some of you may have just learned this new stipulation that's been put on something like the DBRA, but there's countless types of policies that come and go into effect. And yet we aren't getting properly educated, or we don't have the proper tools to be able to support the survivors so they actually can get these life-changing types of opportunities through these laws.
Thank you so much, Monique. And I see Amber was on it and instantly put stuff up that CAST has created on the DBRA in that chat. So thank you so much, Amber, for putting that in there so that people can have a resource to look more at that as it comes up too. And yeah, thank you all for bringing those points. And it is very, very difficult. And Kate, I especially liked that point that you brought up around, like, so much about applying for funding is about, well, tell us what this is going to do, right? What are your outcome measures? We ask that, right, around funding, but we're really just looking for, like, are you tracking outcome measures? Are you finding a good way to do this? But you are expected to show, like, this is how this is going to affect survivors. And that is a really difficult measure to place on people. I'm going to skip the one question just because, and hopefully we'll get back to it, but because both you, Kate, and Monique brought up community, and I want to spend some time there. How important is community in long-term healing? Anyone out of the three, if you want to start there, please feel free.
I'll start. I think it's critical. I don't know how else to put it. It is critical for long term. It just, as we've talked about today, as a survivor comes out, there's all this love and care and arms around and hand holding, and as that continuum of care goes along, some of that releases, which sometimes is okay because that's how you develop independence. But there's always that need for the touch base. And that's where, we've kind of created our we call them our Thrivers group. They're living independently, working independently, but they just need that touch base with their sisters once a month. And it is the most amazing thing. It can be something, they may talk about a trigger. They may talk about, they're dealing with generational things, but that community is still there. And I think that's what is so important that they have developed. Yes, we provide the space and a person to kind of lead the group, but it's the survivors themselves that make it successful.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a basic human need, right? Like, human beings are social mammals. We do not live in isolation. We all have a universal need for love and belonging. That is something that has been exploited in many cases, but that is not something that anyone's wrong for having. Like, there's no human out there who doesn't have that unless they're like a complete sociopath, right? And we all have, like, a very strong need for mirroring, right? To see ourselves in other people, to see that we are like someone else, that we are part of a group, right? Like, that is one of the most fundamental things to being human. And so I think everybody needs community, right? Always. And when you've experienced excruciating things, and when you have experienced trauma, and when you've been through really othering experiences, you need it more than ever. So I think there's no way to do this work and separate from that need, or act like that need is not in some way as relevant as all of the other things.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also add that community is also a way in which we can combat re-exploitation, right? When we're in community, and perhaps we're at different points in our healing journey, I'm speaking specific to survivors, when we're seeing someone that's further along, it's that light for us in a dark tunnel that's like, hey, if she's able to do that, if she was able to move through this, you know what, I can too. And let me go to her and let me ask her some questions, like, how was she able to get through when she felt like she had no purpose and everyone had told her, hey, if you lead the life, everything's going to be great. You're no longer going to be getting abused. You're going to be in such a better place. And then once she's out, she's finding that's actually not the case. And so, how does she reconcile that? How do you leave community, as dysfunctional and abusive as community can be within the commercial sex industry or trafficking, and then move out of that? And now there's an absence of community, right? So, if they're actively in crisis and they're getting hopefully that wraparound support, and then what happens once they begin to stabilize a little bit? And there's no community for them anymore, because they're like, well, you don't really fit in this box, you don't fit in this group anymore, and we don't really have the funding for this, and so you're doing a job, not knowing all of the different things that can come up for them. And so to be able to still have a community to tap into, or to know, hey, I can still have a touch point, I can still give them a call, and though I'm not, actively receiving services from them, I can still connect in with them and feel like I'm cared about, that I'm seen, that I'm heard. And this is why it's so valuable that we connect them in, right? If we're not able to do that, if we don't have the manpower, which I get it, even at Treasures, we work globally, but man, we're a small team. So I understand. However, I do believe that the onus is on us within organizations then to help them transition into that next piece of community. How are we actively even engaging in conversations with them? Because working in the commercial sex industry, you can very much feel like a lone wolf, right? And you've learned you have to meet all your own needs. You've got to figure it out. And so we don't want them to revert back to that. We want to continue to encourage them to be in community. And as they're able to do that and lean on others and not be so self-reliant where it leans into unhealth, then this is going to prevent them going back to the life, because they're like, you know what? I feel lonely. I don't have any support here. I'm going back, which happens. We know it happens. All of us on this call know it happens. And so really, really the importance of them. And it's not just within a survivor community. How are they getting into community if they're interested in doing things in their own city? Or what hobbies do they have? Or, what's the exposure level even that we're having within our organizations, or engaging in conversations with them to know, hey, your survivorship or your experience within sexual exploitation or trafficking, doesn't identify you, right? We are multifaceted human beings. There are so many different parts of us. And so how are we encouraging them to go and tap into and be in community, in different types of communities? Because that's what's going to help them as they move on to those next stages in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about the different types of communities, because there is, of course, something really, really special that happens when it's all people with lived experience. But when we expand from that and we realize like, oh, I actually have a lot of things in common with all of these people that have nothing to do with the lived experience connection, there's something very healing about that. Like just normalizing yourself and understanding like I can have these relationships that have nothing to do with exploitation. But thinking back to those ones that do those like survivor spaces, I know we have a lot of people with lived experience on this call. I see a lot of names in there and a lot of people who are in the field who have lived experience. And I think this is like having those places of community, both for people who have lived experience and are working in this field, and for people who are working at a bank who have lived experience, who are working in a restaurant, who are just going out and living life with nothing to do with lived experience. There is something very, very safe, at least for myself. I know when I've been able to walk into spaces that are set aside for survivors, but not for survivors who are in the field. Just all survivors, like the Treasures Thanksgivings and Christmases. It's just all people who've experienced this, and we get to come together. And for me, I don't have to be like the survivor representing this agency or the survivor leader who does this. And I just get to be like another person who's been through this. It's so safe and healing, and like, and it's just very nice to not have to like explain your background, because there's times where I'm like, oh, you're gonna ask me, random person's gonna be like, ask me a question about vacations with my family, and my lens from that only comes from like all of the trauma and all of things. And so being able to have normal conversations with people who aren't going to like be surprised by saying like, oh, well, I was in the system, so I didn't have a lot of those things, it's really helpful to have those spaces as well. And we don't find them when it's just for survivors who are in the field. A lot of the spaces that are set aside solely for survivors that are in the anti-trafficking field, we still have to carry a lot of that like resource guarding that we end up dealing with in the life, or, are you going to get that opportunity, or am I going to get that opportunity, or whose voice is going to be most valued in this room right now, and am I being heard? So when we get to be in those spaces that don't have to do with being survivor leaders in the field, I have found them to be really, really important and sacred spaces in my life. So I'm kind of saying that to transition, a lot of the attention about this kind of stage of aftercare goes towards survivors who want to work in anti-trafficking. How do we make sure that we're supporting survivors who don't ever want to step into this field? Who wants to start? Kate, you look like you want to start.
Start. I love this because I love the idea that there is room for that level of variety and diversity, and that people can really choose what feels like the right fit to them, right? That because you're a survivor, your job is now not to serve the survivor community for the rest of your life, unless that is your calling, in which case go forth, right? I think people, again, like you don't know what you don't know. And so one of the things we do at Empowered Network is really try to help people look at like what could be a career path. What are the things that you love to do? What are the things that you're really good at? What are strengths that you have that you may not realize translate professionally into, real career strengths? And really looking at some of those things as people chart their course, because there are so many opportunities out there. And I remember, we had done a speaker series. This is years ago, but it's never left me. And all of the speakers were survivor leaders. All of them had done incredible things with their lives. And one of the survivors, who's a regular on the call, she was like, that's all great, but what if I want to have like a regular job, work 9 to 5, go on vacations to the Bahamas twice a year with my girlfriends, and like not write a book and be a speaker and be a lawyer and a doctor and like, what if I just want a normal life? And I was like, I love that you want a normal life. And I think we should normalize people having normal lives that are full of the things that they love to do, which may not be grand, right? And so I think, I love the idea that people can choose to do any and all of those things, that they can be as much a part of survivor spaces as they feel is the right amount for them. And then maybe have a career in tech, or maybe have a career in healthcare, or maybe have a career in the beauty industry, or maybe, I mean, we see people with all of these interesting things. I can't tell you the number of plans that are things I had never heard of. Somebody starting a flagging business in construction, right? Somebody who built an entire tailoring like business, right? All of these different things with all of these different skills. And so I love the idea that that is available, because ultimately, like, that's the ultimate privilege, to be able to choose what it is that you want to do with your life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kate. Jennifer or Monique, I'm sure both of you have things you want to add to that. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I couldn't agree with you more, Kate. And we see that in the scholarship academia that we fund, the different programs that people choose to go into. yes, we have some that they're the social workers, they're the drug and alcohol counselors, they're, you know, and I have such respect because they always say, because I'll point blank ask them, why are you choosing this? And it's always because I was given a hand up, now it's my turn to give a hand up. But I don't want that to take away from those that may choose not to. We have someone who wants to be an accountant. That's great. We have someone that is doing a tech program. Fabulous. We have someone who's in theology. Okay, well, that's, you know, depending on how they want to take that, but it's not a requirement that you, and I think Kate hit on this so many times, there's that when you have that successful survivor, that we constantly go back to them and you know, we want you to tell your story, and we want you to be successful and be a part of this. Well, maybe they don't want to. And that's okay. That is really okay. We have someone who's in a program to become a forensic sketch artist. It's just amazing the talent and what people choose. And I think Kate hit it right there. It is their choice.
Yes. Choice is of the utmost importance, right? Them being able to have autonomy, because for those who've been trafficked and sexually exploited, like, we didn't truly have that. And so I really feel we're doing a disservice as, you know, the anti-trafficking community when we are sort of putting them on this path to go and share their stories. Not everyone needs to share their story. Not everyone needs to be the one to share with someone else, this is how I got out of this. I've heard from so many women that are like, I just want to leave that in the past and move forward. And they get to have that right. You get to just move forward and want to have a normal life. I'm in the role and the position I'm in because I do feel it's a calling. I do feel called to it. There is an immense amount of grace. There's immense amount of, like, with working through this work is hard, right? This work is so hard. Not everyone is called to it. And when someone, you know, sort of the poster child for a particular organization or agency because of how they've grown, and so we're pushing them in that way, I find it almost like kind of abusive and exploitive, to be quite honest, because really us in doing the work and supporting them is allowing them to find their own voice, is allowing them to find and pursue what are the things that excite them, that they're passionate about, and to grow into that. Right? It's not just this one thing in advocacy. And really, for those who do get pushed there because they're the poster child or because they were so resilient, which all of us as survivors are resilient, okay? But what happens then is they will find themselves in a place where they're like, wait a minute, was this my choice? Is this what I want to do? And then the pressure that is put on them and the lack of support, because now they're feeling, and all that you've touched on it, is like, we can't even share when we're going through tough times, even if we've been out for over a decade or however long. We've seen from so many of our survivor sisters who have ended up no longer being on this earth because the pressure was too much and the support wasn't there. And so really for us, and what I love, absolutely love what Empowered Network does, I've actually worked with them as a client to open up and give that exposure and allow us to go on that journey of discovering who are we? Who do we want to be in this next season of our life?
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Monique. And thank you for all of you for just being willing to come and share and talk about this. I am so glad that it's a conversation that we're having openly instead of something that we're just, you know, having between each other, and that we're contributing, and that everyone in the chat and all of our attendees are contributing to as well. We've had so much engagement of people chiming in and agreeing and asking questions throughout this webinar. And we're going to transition over to the questions, but I want to give each of you no pressure. If you don't have anything that you want to add, just the opportunity to, do you have any, before we transition to question and answer, do you have anything final that you want to make sure that people understand about this topic or that you'd like to share? Totally fine if not. Go ahead, Monique.
I'll go. I think I've touched on it so much today, but really I think it's important for us as organizations and doing the work with survivors is to not just think about how do we put out these fires in front of us, but how are we truly mapping out like a continuum of care for our organization for our clients. And so if that's not us and we don't have the funding to be able to provide that aftercare or really that support once they're out of crisis, how are we then working with the community at large to provide those warm handoffs so that they are supported throughout their journey?
Yeah. Did anybody else want to add? Go ahead, Jennifer.
I couldn't agree with you more, Monique. I think no one organization can do everything. When you look at the continuum of care for a survivor, it's just those warm handoffs are so important, and to continue to develop those so that we don't have that reoccurrence, we don't have that, that person that does that relapse. I don't think we can guarantee that it will never happen, but the stronger we link arms and the stronger those ties are, hopefully we can reduce that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys nailed it, but I love, Monique, I got this image you said earlier, like we link arms, and I love that image. I love the idea that all of us are doing the work that we're doing, also in community, linking arms, right? Our co-founder, Abby, always talks about sharing our gold, right? We do not have a scarcity mindset. We share our gold. And I think it's just such an important thing. Like none of us can do all of it, and none of us even would be good at doing all of it. Like, so it's really wonderful to have friends and community. I see Alicia Tappan in the chat linking her organization. She does incredible work, right? We all are doing this together in community all the time, and it's the only way to do it. So I'm just really grateful to be here and in conversation today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kate. And I do want to just highlight that, like, these are just a few of the organizations that are doing this. Alicia, make sure you copy that and put that back in the chat because you only shared it with us, and everyone needs to, us as panelists. And I want everyone to see what you guys are doing at Survivor Led. And so Alicia's organization, there's Elevate, there's all sorts of great orgs that are providing services to survivors that have experienced levels of stability and are stepping into real life, as we sometimes call it. And we don't have a lot of time for questions, but I want to touch on some of these. And I thought this one was really great for you all. The last question that we got was that given the high demand for emergency care and services, how can you support your staff who often have to refer urgent cases? How can you help them cope with feelings of letting down or turning away a survivor in such situations while helping them focus on the longer term care your organization focuses on? Who wants to answer that? I know that's a hard one and something I'm sure all of you experience.
I mean, I can go because I encounter that so often. And I am the case manager at Treasures, and we don't work with women in crisis. And let me tell you, it is so hard to have to know this just isn't what we're equipped for, right? And I think that's important, is knowing what are we equipped for? Because if we are not trained or we are not set up to work with survivors who are actively in crisis, we're going to do more harm than good. And so this goes back to me speaking about it takes a village. So do we know partners that are doing great work with survivors who are in crisis that we can provide those referrals to, that maybe we can even get on that initial call with them so they feel cared for in that process? This is what's going to be vital. But of course, we're humans. I deal with guilt and shame about it when I'm not able to help them, but it's just, it's too much, right? I'm not able to care for and deal with the rest of my responsibilities that I have at Treasures. And so I just know my lane. I know my lane, and I properly set them up with resources and support as they get that linkage to the crisis case management.
Yeah, I could not agree more, Monique, but I also think the thing about crisis, right, is it has this feeling of like stopping you in your tracks. And so there are a couple of things that I do personally to kind of like talk myself out of the mindset, right? First of all, there is life after crisis. And sometimes it feels like this crisis is stopping everything right now. We have to figure it out right now. And while that's not untrue, the idea that that person 6 months from now will not be in crisis and will be ready for what we have to offer, like we're always hoping for that moment, right? This might not be the time, but time hasn't stopped. And there is all sorts of possibility at the other side of this crisis. I think the piece that you mentioned, Monique, is super important, like understanding when you will absolutely be doing harm because you do not have the resources to manage a crisis. And there are really great resources out there for managing a crisis. And so you standing in the way and trying to manage it while they could be getting that real help and getting out of that crisis faster is absolutely a disservice. And so I think, you know, for us, we really avoid crisis like the plague. In some ways, you know, that's a little bit of a misnomer, but really because if all of the funding that exists goes towards crisis, and then again, you get out of the crisis and there's no way to fund other things that will keep you out of crisis, how is that serving anyone, right? Like there needs to be the ability to build. And so, you know, we really reserve what we do for the time to build. And we really believe that that time to build will come in everybody's life at different times. And we want to be there when that happens, not at the wrong time. We want to be there at the time when they're ready to build.
I think we're going to have time for one more question. So one that I'm getting a few different questions about is around back to what we talked about as far as like funding and writing outcomes. Do you all have any suggestions about when you're working with this population of people in this stage of life? How do you kind of write or suggest, what have you found to work when it comes to measuring outcomes and making statements of where you expect services to end up?
That's a really great question, because going back to what we talked about earlier with some grants, we had a long time corporate grant that we would just get all of them. And not that we ever took it for granted, no pun intended, but all of a sudden they didn't fund us this year. And we're like, what happened? And it literally was, oh, we want to look at some new things. That was it. That's all we got back. So in essence, when you're doing that type of requesting grants, you have to prove your worth, is really what it comes down to. So it's a matter of when you're in the long-term, you know, kind of survivor care, it's the constant look at where are they, how are they progressing. You know, yes, you have to get their, you know, the program testimonials and those type of things. But that funding piece is, as I mentioned earlier, in today's chaos, we just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to add to that? Well, I appreciate everyone jumping on with us today. Thank you for each of you, the panelists, Monique, Kate, Jennifer, for sharing your expertise and talking about the subject, and especially for serving survivors in this stage of life. It often does not get the glamorous attention. I think a lot of us in long-term care who aren't, helping people exit immediately don't get the kind of attention that is deserved, because this is long-term work. And I've benefited from 2 out of the 3 of the organizations on there and been able to receive services. And I know many of the survivors that are in the chat have also been able to receive care from you guys. And we just really appreciate what you're doing. And thank you to everyone who prioritized this conversation and made it a point to be here in your schedule today. So thank you all for coming and participating and prioritizing this conversation.